Hello, dear friend, and welcome to the amazing Sleep Story Tales. I'm so glad you're here with us tonight. Before we begin our journey into the deep halls of the Lonely Mountain and follow the remarkable tale of a dwarf who would change the world, I'd love to take just a moment to connect with you wherever you are right now. How was your day today? Was it filled with challenges that left you feeling a bit worn out? Or perhaps it was one of those ordinary days that somehow still managed to drain your energy by the time evening arrived. Whatever kind of day you've had, you're here now, and that's what matters. You've made it to this quiet moment, this space that's just for you. Where are you listening from right now? Are you tucked under your covers in a cozy bedroom, perhaps with the lights dimmed low and the world outside your window slowly settling into darkness? Or maybe you're on a couch, wrapped in your favorite blanket, finally allowing yourself to unwind after a long day. Some of you might even be listening while traveling in a hotel room far from home, seeking the comfort of a familiar voice and a soothing story to help you drift off in an unfamiliar place. Wherever you are, whatever brought you here tonight, I want you to know that this time is yours. For the next little while, you don't need to think about tomorrow's responsibilities or yesterday's worries. You don't need to be anywhere else or do anything else. You're exactly where you need to be. Take a deep breath with me, if you'd like. Breathe in slowly through your nose. Hold it for just a moment, and then let it out gently through your mouth. Feel your shoulders drop. Feel the tension beginning to melt away from your body. You're safe here, you're comfortable, and you're ready to let go of the day. Tonight, we're going to journey together into the kingdom under the mountain and follow the story of Gimli, son of Glóin, a dwarf who began his life carrying ancient prejudices and ended it by breaking every rule and expectation of his people in the most beautiful way possible. His tale is one of the most remarkable transformations in all of Middle-earth's history. Gimli's story reminds us that we are not defined by the assumptions we inherit or the prejudices we're taught. It shows us that friendship can change us in profound ways, opening our eyes to beauty we never knew existed and transforming our hearts in ways we never imagined possible. It's a story about having the courage to change, to admit when we're wrong, and to let love overcome fear. You don't need to stay awake for the whole story. In fact, I hope you don't. This story is here to carry you gently into sleep, like a leaf floating downstream on a quiet river. If you drift off after 5 minutes or 50, that's perfectly wonderful. The story will be here waiting for you tomorrow night, or the next night, or whenever you need it again. So go ahead and settle in a little deeper. Adjust your pillow just the way you like it. Pull your blanket a bit closer. Close your eyes if you haven't already, or let them gently rest half closed if that feels more comfortable. Let your breathing become slow and natural, like waves lapping softly against a peaceful shore. Before we begin, I want to thank you for choosing the amazing Sleep Story Tales. It means the world to me that you've invited me into this quiet, personal moment of your day. If you enjoy today's story, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and join our growing community of dreamers and story lovers. We have so many more tales to share with you, each one crafted with care to help you find the rest and peace you deserve. And now, let's begin. Let's travel together to Erebor, the lonely mountain, where the forges burn bright and the sound of hammers on anvils echoes through stone halls. There we'll meet a young dwarf named Gimli, son of a hero, heir to ancient traditions, who would one day become the only dwarf ever to sail to the undying lands, not because of his prowess in battle or his skill in crafting, but because of a friendship that changed everything. Are you ready? Then let us begin our tale of Gimli, the dwarf who learned to see beauty in unexpected places, who had the courage to change his heart, and who proved that love and friendship can overcome even the oldest and deepest divides. Breathe easily, relax completely, and let the story begin. In the year 2879 of the Third Age, in the great dwarf kingdom under the lonely mountain, a son was born to Glóin, one of the companions of Thorin Oakenshield. They named him Gimli, and though none could know it then, he would become one of the most celebrated dwarves in all the history of his people, a warrior and a craftsman, and most remarkably, the first and only dwarf ever to sail to the undying lands. Gimli's father, Glóin, was already famous among the dwarves in his youth. Glóin had been one of the 13 companions who accompanied Thorin Oakenshield and Bilbo Baggins on the quest to reclaim Erebor, the lonely mountain, from the dragon Smaug. That adventure had ended in victory. The dragon was slain, the mountain reclaimed, and the kingdom under the mountain restored. Glóin had fought in the Battle of 5 Armies and had helped establish the new realm under Dane Ironfoot, who became king under the mountain after Thorin's death. So Gimli grew up in a time of prosperity and peace for his people. The kingdom under the mountain was rich and strong, its halls filled with the sound of hammers on anvils, the glow of forges, and the songs of dwarves at their work. The treasure hoard of Smaug had been divided among those who had rightful claim to it, and the dwarves used that wealth to rebuild their ancient home and restore it to glory. From his earliest days, Gimli learned the crafts of his people. Dwarves were the greatest craftsmen in Middle-earth, masters of stonework and metalwork, able to fashion things of beauty and utility that no other race could match. They could carve living rock into halls of stunning beauty, could work metals into objects both practical and precious, and could create works that would endure for ages. Gimli learned to use hammer and chisel to shape stone and metal, to see the potential beauty hidden within raw materials. He learned the secrets of different ores and gems, how to find them in the earth, and how to work them once they were mined. He became skilled in the fashioning of weapons and armor, learning to forge blades that would hold an edge through decades of use, and mail that could turn aside the strongest blows. But Gimli learned more than just craftsmanship. He learned the history of his people, the long tale of the dwarves, from their awakening under the mountains to the present age. He learned of the 7 fathers of the dwarves, created by Olli the Vala before even the elves awoke. He learned of the great dwarf kingdoms of old Khazad-dûm, called Moria by the elves, the greatest of all their realms, and Nograd and Belagost in the Blue Mountains, long since fallen. He learned of the friendship between dwarves and elves in the elder days, when they had worked together and learned from each other. But he also learned of the betrayals and conflicts that had sundered that friendship, the dispute over the Silmaril in Doriath, the attacks by dwarves on elven kingdoms, and the long years of mutual suspicion that followed. Gimli's family had particular reason to distrust elves, especially the woodland elves of Mirkwood. When Thorin and his company had passed through Mirkwood on their quest, they had been captured by Thranduil, the Elven King, and imprisoned in his dungeons. Though they eventually escaped, the memory of that imprisonment rankled. Glóin spoke of it to his son, and Gimli grew up with the understanding that while elves might be mighty and ancient, they were also proud and not to be trusted, particularly the elves of the woodland realm. Gimli also learned the art of war. Dwarves were fierce fighters when roused, able to stand against enemies much larger than themselves through skill, endurance, and sheer stubborn courage. They favored axes and heavy armor, fighting in close formation where their strength and resilience gave them advantage. Gimli trained with axe and shield, learning the techniques passed down through generations of dwarf warriors. As Gimli grew to maturity, and dwarves matured more slowly than men, not coming into their full strength until their 50s, he became known as a dwarf of exceptional ability. He was strong, even by dwarf standards, skilled with his axe, and clever with his hands. He had his father's courage and his people's pride, and he carried himself with the confidence of one who knew his worth. But the peace of the kingdom under the mountain was not destined to last undisturbed. Shadow was growing again in Middle-earth, and even the strong halls of Erebor were not immune to its influence. In the year 3018 of the Third Age, when Gimli was 139 years old, and in the prime of his strength, dark tidings came to the lonely mountain. A messenger from Mordor appeared, seeking news of a creature called Gollum and of a magic ring. The messenger offered great rewards for information and made veiled threats about what might happen if the dwarves did not cooperate. King Dain was troubled by this visit, for he recognized that the enemy was searching for something, and that the dwarves might be drawn into conflicts not of their making. He sent Glóin and Gimli as representatives to Rivendell to seek the counsel of Elrond Half-Elven and to learn what was happening in the wider world. It was Gimli's first great journey from the mountain, and he traveled west with his father, crossing the wild lands between Erebor and Rivendell. They passed through dangerous country where orcs and worse things lurked, but they were dwarves, well-armed and hardy, and they reached the hidden valley safely. Rivendell was unlike anything Gimli had seen before, where the halls of Erebor were carved from stone, solid and enduring. Rivendell was delicate and open, filled with the sound of waterfalls and elven singing. Gimli was impressed despite himself, though he would not have admitted it easily. His inherited distrust of elves warred with his appreciation for beauty and craftsmanship, and he found Rivendell to be both wonderful and unsettling. At the council of Elrond, Gimli sat with his father and listened as the great and the wise debated the fate of the ring. He learned the full history of the One Ring, learned of Sauron's return, and understood for the first time the magnitude of the threat facing all the free peoples of Middle-earth. When representatives of different peoples spoke, tensions arose. The elves and dwarves had old grievances, and these surfaced during the discussions. Gimli spoke boldly in defense of his people, when he felt they were being slighted, and he was particularly sharp when speaking to or about the elves, especially those from Mirkwood. It was there that he met Legolas, son of Thranduil, the very king who had imprisoned his father decades before. The meeting was not friendly. Each saw in the other the representative of a people they had been taught to distrust. When words grew heated, both Gimli and Legolas said things they might later regret, letting old prejudices speak louder than wisdom. But Elrond was wise, and when the Fellowship of the Ring was chosen, he named both Gimli and Legolas among the 9 companions. Perhaps he hoped that traveling together might heal the old wounds between their peoples, or perhaps he simply knew that both were needed, that the skills of dwarf and elf would be essential in the trials ahead. Gimli accepted his place in the Fellowship with pride and determination. He would represent the dwarves in this great quest, and he would prove that his people were as brave and as vital to the cause as any elf or man. If he had to travel with Legolas, so be it. He would show the elf what dwarves were made of. The Fellowship departed from Rivendell in the deep of winter, and from the start, Gimli found the journey challenging in ways he had not expected. Dwarves were not made for long marches across open country. They were strongest underground or in the mountains, and Gimli's legs, though powerful, were shorter than those of the men and the elf in the company. He had to work harder to keep pace, though his pride would never let him complain or ask them to slow down. On the mountain of Caradhras, when the snow fell thick and the Fellowship struggled through the drifts, Gimli labored along with the rest. He watched with some resentment as Legolas walked lightly on top of the snow, barely leaving a mark, while he himself had to plow through the deep drifts. It seemed to confirm all his assumptions about elves. They were delicate creatures, useful in forests perhaps, but not serious warriors who could endure real hardship. But when it was decided to pass through Moria, Gimli's mood changed entirely. Moria, Khazad-dûm, the greatest of the dwarf kingdoms, the ancient realm of Durin's folk. Though it had fallen long ago, Gimli had heard tales of its glory all his life, and he longed to see even its ruins, to walk the halls his ancestors had built. "There lies the Mirror," he said, as they approached, and there the endless stair and the halls of Durin. "I would give gold to behold them." His enthusiasm was genuine and touching, a glimpse of the dwarf beneath the gruff exterior. But Moria was not what Gimli had hoped. The doors were hard to open, and once inside, they found only darkness and silence. The great halls were empty, the forges cold, the dwarves long gone. Gimli's hopes of finding Balin, who had led an expedition to recolonize Moria 30 years before, were dashed when they found his tomb in the chamber of Mazarbel. Gimli wept for Balin, whom he had known, and for all the dwarves who had perished in Moria. His grief was deep and genuine, for dwarves felt loss keenly and remembered their dead across many generations, but grief could not stop them. Orcs attacked, and Gimli fought with fierce determination, his axe rising and falling as he defended his companions and avenged his kinsmen. Then came the Balrog, and Gandalf fell. Gimli was devastated by the loss of the wizard, who had been a friend to the dwarves and had helped Thorin's company on their quest. But he had no time to mourn. They had to flee or die. The fellowship emerged from Moria into the sunlight and made their way to Lothlorien. Gimli was reluctant to enter the elven woods, and his reluctance deepened when Celeborn spoke harshly of the dwarves, blaming them for awakening the Balrog through their greedy mining. Gimli bristled at this accusation, ready to respond with heat. But then Galadriel spoke, and something in her voice and her presence gave him pause. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw not just a dwarf, but an individual, Gimli, son of Glóin, with his own heart and his own worth. Dark is the water of Keld Zarum, and cold are the springs of Kibble Nala, she said, speaking of places in Moria, using the dwarven names, showing respect for his people and their language. My heart trembles at the thought that Gimli, son of Glóin, should pass through any doors of Moria and not see the Mirror. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything to Gimli. Here was an elf, and not just any elf, but the Lady of Lothlorien herself, one of the most powerful beings in Middle-earth, and she spoke to him with respect and understanding. She acknowledged his loss and his people's claim to Moria. Later, Galadriel spoke with each member of the Fellowship privately. What she said to Gimli is not fully recorded, but it changed him. She looked into his heart and saw the good there, the courage and the loyalty beneath the gruff exterior. And in turn, Gimli looked at her and saw beauty beyond anything he had imagined. For dwarves, beauty was usually found in things crafted with skill in jewels and metalwork in perfectly carved stone. But Galadriel showed Gimli a different kind of beauty, the beauty of living grace and ancient wisdom. He was, despite all his prejudices, completely captivated. When the Fellowship prepared to leave Lothlorien, Galadriel offered to give each of them a gift. When she asked Gimli what he desired, he was struck with sudden boldness and asked for a single strand of her hair. It was an extraordinary request. Fëanor himself, greatest of all the Noldor, had asked Galadriel 3 times for a strand of her hair, and she had refused him each time. But to Gimli she gave not 1 strand, but 3, saying, "I do not foretell, for all foretelling is now vain. On the one hand lies darkness, and on the other only hope. But if hope should not fail, then I say to you, Gimli, son of Glóin, that your hands shall flow with gold, yet over you gold shall have no dominion." Gimli treasured these strands more than any jewel, keeping them in a crystal case. His companions were amazed at this gift and at the change it wrought in him. He spoke now of the Lady Galadriel with a reverence that bordered on worship, and his entire attitude toward elves began to shift. It was during their time in Lothlorien that Gimli and Legolas truly began to speak with each other as individuals rather than as representatives of their races. They walked together in the forest, and Legolas showed Gimli the beauty of the Malern trees and the way light filtered through their leaves. Gimli, in turn, spoke of the beauty found in stone and crystal, in caves and underground halls. To his surprise, Legolas listened with genuine interest, and Gimli found himself listening when Legolas spoke of the forest. They began to understand that beauty could take many forms, and that what one people treasured, another might also learn to appreciate. As the Fellowship traveled down the great river and then pursued the orcs across the plains of Rohan, the bond between Gimli and Legolas deepened They ran together for days, and though Gimli's shorter legs made the journey harder for him, he never complained and never asked to slow down. Legolas respected this determination, and when Gimli showed signs of flagging, the elf would encourage him with words of friendship rather than mockery. At Helm's Deep, fighting side by side through the long night, their friendship was truly forged. They made a game of counting the enemies each slew, competing with good-natured rivalry. When the battle was won, they compared tallies: 42 for Gimli, 43 for Legolas, and Gimli protested that one of Legolas's kills had been ambiguous and shouldn't count. But beneath the banter was genuine respect and affection. They had protected each other in the battle, fought back to back, and trusted each other with their lives. Gimli had proven that dwarves were mighty warriors, and Legolas had proven that elves were not merely graceful, but also deadly in combat. After the battle, when they explored the glittering caves that Helm's Deep was built against, Gimli was overwhelmed by their beauty. There are columns of white and saffron, and Donro's Legolas, fluted and twisted into dreamlike forms, he told the elf. And if a light were kindled, glints of precious ore would be caught in the stone and sparkle like stars. He made Legolas promise to visit the caves with him when the war was over, and in return, Gimli promised to go with Legolas to Fangorn Forest. It was a pact of friendship, each agreeing to see beauty in what the other loved, to step outside their own preferences and prejudices to understand their friend's perspective. When they walked the paths of the dead with Aragorn, Gimli was frightened. Even dwarves, who were not afraid of the dark, could feel the horror of that place. But he walked on without flinching, determined not to fail his companions. Legolas walked beside him, and each drew strength from the other's presence. At the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, they fought together once more, and their combined skills proved devastating to the enemy's forces. Afterward, they walked through Minas Tirith, and Gimli observed that it was a city of stone with no living things. "I miss the sound of water and the whisper of trees," Legolas replied, and Gimli understood. Each of them longed for what was familiar, but they could also appreciate what the other valued. When Aragorn led the host of the West to the Black Gate for the final desperate gamble, Gimli marched with him, his axe ready. He stood firm in that last battle, fighting without hope of victory, buying time for the ring-bearer. And when the ring was destroyed and Sauron fell, Gimli rejoiced with his companions, knowing they had achieved the impossible. After the War of the Ring, Gimli remained in Gondor for a time, celebrating Aragorn's coronation and the beginning of the New Age. But his thoughts turned to the promises he had made. He and Legolas went together to the glittering caves, and Gimli showed the elf the wonders hidden in the stone. Legolas was awed by what he saw. The caves were indeed beautiful, filled with natural formations of stunning complexity and grace. He began to understand what Gimli loved about such places: the permanence of stone, the way it could be shaped by water over ages into forms of unexpected beauty, the play of light on crystal and mineral. In return, they went to Fangorn Forest, and though Gimli was nervous at first in that ancient wood, Legolas showed him its beauty. The great trees, the sense of deep time, the feeling of ancient life and slow growth. Gimli came to appreciate it, even to love it in his own way. But Gimli could not wander forever. He had work to do, a promise to fulfill. With Aragorn's blessing, he led a company of dwarves from Erebor to the glittering caves, and there he established a new colony. Under his leadership, the dwarves worked wonders, carving the caves into halls of breathtaking beauty, creating works of art in living stone. Gimli became known as the Lord of the Glittering Caves, and his work there was celebrated throughout Middle-earth. Men came from far away to see what the dwarves had created, and Gimli's fame grew. He also helped rebuild much of Gondor. 4 dwarves were the finest masons and builders, and their skills were needed in the restoration of the kingdom. He journeyed often to visit Legolas in Ithilien, and their friendship remained strong through all the years of the Fourth Age. They would spend time together, sharing meals and stories, and their friendship became legendary, symbol of the new age, where old enmities were healed and different peoples could work together in harmony. Years passed, and Gimli grew old. Even dwarves, who could live 250 years or more, eventually felt the weight of age. His beard grew white, his movements slower, but his mind remained sharp, and his hands could still work marvels when he set them to a task. When Aragorn died in the year 120 of the Fourth Age, Gimli mourned deeply. The king who had led them through the War of the Ring, who had been his companion and friend, was gone. The ties that bound Gimli to Middle-earth were weakening. Then Legolas came to Gimli with an extraordinary proposal. The elf had built a ship and was preparing to sail to Valinor, for the sea longing had become too strong to resist. But he would not go alone. He wanted Gimli to come with him. It was an unprecedented suggestion. No dwarf had ever sailed to the Undying Lands. Valinor was the realm of the Valar and the elves, not for mortals. The very idea seemed impossible, even blasphemous to some. But Gimli considered it carefully. What held him in Middle-earth now? His great work in the glittering caves was complete. Aragorn was dead. The age was changing, and the time of dwarves, like the time of elves, was passing. And most importantly, Legolas was his dearest friend, closer than a brother, and Gimli could not bear the thought of being parted from him. "I will go with you," Gimli said. "If the Valar will have me, I will sail with you to the uttermost west." They sailed from the Grey Havens together, the elf and the dwarf, companions to the end and beyond. As their ship moved out into the western sea, Gimli looked back one last time at Middle-earth. He thought of the mountain where he was born, of the glittering caves he had shaped, of the battles he had fought, and the friends he had made. But most of all, he thought of Legolas, standing beside him at the ship's rail, and he was content. Whatever awaited them in Valinor, they would face it together. The tradition holds that the Valar did indeed accept Gimli. They saw the friendship between elf and dwarf, and understood what it represented: the healing of ancient wounds, the triumph of love over prejudice, the possibility of understanding between peoples. They granted Gimli entry to Valinor, not as a reward for his deeds in the War of the Ring, though those were considerable, but because of his friendship with Legolas, and because of what he had become through that friendship. What can we say of Gimli, son of Glóin? He began his life with all the prejudices and assumptions of his people, taught to distrust elves and to see beauty only in the things dwarves valued. He was proud, stubborn, and quick to take offense when he felt his people were slighted. But through his friendship with Legolas, Gimli was transformed. He learned to see beauty in living things as well as in stone and metal. He learned that elves could be trustworthy and honorable. He learned that his assumptions about an entire people could be wrong, and that individuals should be judged by their own character rather than by their race. Most importantly, Gimli learned to love, not the love of treasure or craft, though he never lost his appreciation for those things, but the love of friendship, deep and true and transcending all boundaries. His love for Legolas changed him in fundamental ways, making him larger in spirit, more generous in outlook, more open to new experiences. And in the end, this transformation earned him a reward beyond any treasure: passage to Valinor, eternal life in the blessed realm, the company of his dearest friend forever. He became the only dwarf ever granted such a gift, and he earned it not through conquest or craft, but through friendship and love. Gimli's story teaches us that we are not bound by the prejudices we inherit, that we can change and grow throughout our lives, learning to see the world through new eyes, that friendship can transform us in ways we never imagined, opening our hearts to beauty and understanding we never knew existed. It teaches us that stubbornness can be a virtue when it means standing firm in battle or persevering in our work, but that it becomes a vice when it prevents us from admitting we were wrong or from accepting new truths. Gimli had the courage to change his mind, to admit that his prejudices against elves were unfounded, and that courage made him greater than any amount of physical bravery could have done. Close your eyes now and imagine Gimli in Valinor, walking through halls of crystal and stone, more beautiful than any he crafted in Middle-earth, with Legolas at his side. His long journey is over, his work complete, his battles won. He has found peace and joy beyond anything he imagined in his youth. Sleep well, dear friend. The stone is solid beneath you. The stars are bright above, and all is well in the world tonight. The end.